Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today, I have Hyang Padma on the show. Hyang has combined an academic career with her vocation as a spiritual teacher. Hyang served as Director of Spirituality and Education, as well as a Buddhist chaplain at Wellesley College for 14 years. Additionally, she has served as a meditation teacher at Harvard University, Boston University, Babson College, and Omega Institute. Hyang Padma is the author of the new book, Field of Blessings. Field of Blessings is a turning point, a revitalization of the healing arts in Western culture. Reclaim the power of ritual healing and reconnect with the roots of mind-body medicine. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Absolutely my pleasure.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to thank you all for your continuing support of the show and for passing forward my podcast. My podcast has grown only because of my listeners. So I just want to give you a moment to tell you how much I appreciate you and what you have done for me to help me grow. And I'm excited to say that I am now a featured creator on Fireside. Fireside is an app that allows the audience to be part of the process. So I will be hosting shows over on Fireside where you can listen live to the show. You can also ask questions of the guests. If you find me on Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins, you can link to my Fireside bio there, and you'll be able to download the app through that. Also, if you haven't subscribed to my newsletter yet, please do so at dramyrobbins.com. I'm going to be switching to bi-weekly newsletters, so you won't be getting them weekly anymore, but you will be getting bi-weekly newsletters with my soul wisdom and other fun tidbits that I'm going to bring to you all. So go ahead, follow me on Instagram, find me on Fireside. You will also still be able to hear your podcasts as you are used to listening to them on Apple or Spotify or wherever else you get your podcasts. But Fireside gives you the opportunity to listen live with me. So I would love to have you come join me over there. DM me if you have any questions. And thanks again for your continued support. So first of all, can you tell me a little bit about the premise of the book before we get into more of my specific questions?
Sure. Well, the premise is basically that Buddhism was one of the first psychologies. And out of that, people gained some good insight into the way that the mind and body work together and ways in which that can support our healing on all the levels, spiritually, physically, socially. And in the process of Buddhism traveling to China and Korea and other countries, actually, it was the Buddhist monks' gifts for doing healing work that very often opened the door to the royal court or, to the acceptance of Buddhism by the people. Now, as Buddhism has come to the West, quite naturally, the pioneers have focused on meditation, which is the ultimate goal of liberation. But at the same time, Buddhism throughout its history has always worked on both the relative and the absolute levels. And so what I've done in speaking with Buddhist healers is to reclaim some of that, those resources. We have mindfulness, which is being used for mind-body healing, but that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right. So you talk about mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is, I think, the probably form of meditation that people are most familiar with. Jon Kabat-Zinn sort of brought it here. But can you talk about what healing looks like through the Buddhist lens and this I'm going to have a hard time saying this. Why can I not say this? Mutality. I'll let you say it for me. Between consciousness, mutuality. Thank you. Between consciousness and body.
Yeah. Well, from the very beginning, which in the Pali Canon, the consciousness and the body are referred to as resting upon each other, like the two sheaves of grain, so that if you had these, this one bound up pile of grain and the other one, you might lean them up against each other so that they didn't fall to the ground and get mildewy. So in that way, the consciousness is resting upon the body and the body upon the consciousness. If we don't have a body, then we don't have, the experiences that we know. But at the same time, consciousness is something that while it's created together with the body, it also has its own stream of continuing energy. And so we understand that, we need this kind of indwelling body, to know things the way that we do, but also the body needs that light of consciousness. And it is being energetically informed by consciousness. And so we know this very much in modern science through the endocrine system. The endocrine glands are located at the places that we know to be the chakra centers, actually. And so they're serving as a space between the physical world and what we're taking in through what in Buddhism we call the rupa skandhas, the sensory perceptions. And at the same time, the body is making meaning, of those sensory experiences. So we have, we see something, we see an old friend, right? And then, there are certain things that are released, that kind of tend and befriend of our oxytocin is released, for instance. Or if it's someone else, maybe we see our high school algebra teacher, and maybe we have a fight or flight response if we didn't enjoy algebra. So then that sets off the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, and which basically sets into motion our fight or flight response. The heartbeat becomes more fast, the pulse is more rapid, the energy flows from the inner organs out to the extremities. And, we're experiencing that kind of hyperactivation. Now, in our modern life, the threats that we face are not this one moment physical thing, like seeing a saber-toothed tiger. The threats we have in terms of our economic or relational health or our, work-life balance. Those are things that can go on for quite a while. And so in our modern life, that HPA axis can be overactivated chronically. And that leads to insomnia or tight shoulders or, butterflies in the stomach and that kind of unease or dis-ease within our body, which we try to self-medicate using food or technology or overwork or all other kind of things. And actually, when we return to these sort of basic mind-body practices, it helps us to reset the system. That's in a short form, how things are playing out between the physical and that kind of mind, emotion, spirit.
So it starts with that immediate sort of, what is my kind of psychological experience of this, and how that then gets translated and filtered through the body.
Yes, so that the information is coming up from the body through the limbic system to the brain, and the brain is then kind of parsing things out. Based on the way that we judge this, is this my old friend or is this my algebra teacher, for instance? Then that sets the endocrine system into motion. And the information goes down to the gut, but then what's interesting is it comes back up from the gut to the brain again. So it's the mind and the body are reinforcing each other.
Well, and so is where the psychology comes in here is that, oh, there's my old algebra teacher, right? You have this initial reaction of, oh, I failed algebra. This person might think I'm an idiot or whatever it is. And then you go, the psychology, I think, tell me I might be totally wrong here, goes to wait. That was my algebra teacher. That was 8th grade. This is no longer the experience that I have of myself. So I don't need to disrupt my body in this way.
Yeah, ideally we are able to take our thoughts with a grain of salt. Hopefully we don't believe everything we think. We can check out that initial reaction if we get startled. That there's research that shows that whatever that first emotion is, it lasts only 6 seconds. Just 6 seconds. And so after that is what we are perpetuating, basically. What kind of judgment did we form? Did we completely identify with that original response, to the point where we've got a whole story in our mind? Or on the other hand, did we say, yeah, that was a long time ago. We're such different people now. I'm really glad to see her. It's been a while. That's just as equally possible. And that completely shifts the parameters.
Well, my gosh, that shifts everything, right? I mean, that shifts, if you think about that one little thought and how you shift it, it changes your entire physiological response to that.
Right. It completely de-escalates it.
Mm-hmm.
And we all have that, we all have that potential. That's the best healing work ever, which is don't believe everything you think. But on the other hand, if you do get into something that, that feels a little bit touchy, then, the next thing is that there are ways to work with that, whether it's something that is a kind of spiritual distress, or if it's something that's happening in the body. And again, we see that very often a lot of deep interplay between these. The research that there has come out on adverse childhood experience, for instance, that when people have had this early life experience of, loss or separation or, something else that felt a bit neglectful, then that makes them more predisposed to have certain classifications of physical illness. And so because things kind of snowballed within the system. But even if we're in that place, where maybe our physical body isn't exactly where we would like it to be, or our relationships, the relationships are also based on that early life experience. All of those relational patterns, as are formed in those first 2 years before the prefrontal cortex is online. So all of that unconscious material is governing, the way that we fall in love or the way that we relate to ourselves now. Mm-hmm. And also, it's possible to use some of these practices to do a kind of reboot.
Well, and you talk a little bit in the book about attachment theory. And I know you talk about Daniel
Siegel.
Daniel Siegel. Thank you. I always want to say Daniel Stern. Daniel Siegel, who I actually sat at a table with 20 years ago. He was speaking at a event that I was on for where I did my internship. And my mouth was like on the floor at what he was saying. I just think he is such a phenomenal speaker, and the work that he's done is so amazing around mirror neurons and yes. I mean, everything that he's done. But can you explain how you incorporate some of these practices into shifting those early childhood experiences or those early attachment experiences?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think one common thing that people experience, if they've had some early life insecure attachment, is that it's really hard for them to open up to the abundance of love that's available in the here and now, because there's some kind of core belief that there's a scarcity, or that the love could be truncated at any time. And so one of the first basic practices that has been adopted actually by Lama John McCransky, who is a professor with the Department of Comparative Theology at Boston College. That is adopted from traditional Tibetan practice of devotion. And so within this is something that anyone can do, is just taking a moment to envision all of these people who from the very beginning of our lives have carried a wish for our well-being. You know, our brothers, sisters, our parents or our grandparents, our friends, and also those people like His Holiness the Dalai Lama or Bishop Tutu, who carry a wish of well-being for everyone. So just taking a moment to envision their bright faces and really genuinely feel and sense that love flowing forth from them like a brilliant light, filling our heart, you know, opening the heart, expanding it, awakening it. So then our heart itself is like a golden, life-giving sun. And that light goes to renew every cell of the body, you know, all the way nourishing the bone marrow, shimmering through those cells of the skin. And we bask in that. And we practice fully receiving that because that's the way that life is. And then out of that, of course, having received so much blessing, we then have an opportunity. You know, we can sit there and we can envision sending that out to the people that we care for, sending that out to wherever in the world it's most needed. And so that's kind of restoring people's place in the family of things.
It's so beautiful and it seems so simple. Like this is what always I think is so hard for people is these practices seem so simple. It seems like, is that going to be enough?
Yeah. Well, we have a few different practices in the book, thankfully, you know, but that's one of the baseline. That one is like a Swiss Army knife for me. It just about cures everything. But we can also look at the work that's been adopted from Buddhist tradition by Peter Levine in his somatic experiencing work. And so there's another example of where these traditional Buddhist practices have been very effectively secularized.
So for people who don't know, can you just explain, we've talked about it a little bit, but Peter Levine's work and somatic experiences?
So Peter Levine has done this really groundbreaking work in helping to heal trauma, working through the body. You know, what's been found is that when people have PTSD, for instance, very often there are pharmaceuticals like fluoxetine that have been prescribed, but the fluoxetine only works when it's being prescribed. When people go off the medicine, then the PTSD returns. So there are certain processes like desensitization, where people would be bringing up the emotions and the experience, and hopefully to, just move through it. But actually, there are people who had their experiences in childhood for whom those memories are not really clear. And those therapies might not be tolerable or they might not be effective. With EMDR as well, because EMDR really is based on being able to tap into that original imprint. You know, if it's really early life, then that imprint is maybe not accessible, or again, it might not be tolerable. So the nice thing about somatic experiencing is that it just works directly with the body. The limbic system, which includes the amygdala, you know, that's where we have that experience of that fear or emotional imprint that we can't really touch consciously. You know, there's that experience of, I know something, but I can't quite say it. That's the kind of experience of the amygdala. There are all kinds of things that we know in a sort of tacit, unconscious way. And so somatic experiencing works through that system, through the body's knowing. And one of the effective ways that he's done that really is, it's so simple. It's one of the practices he encourages is this sort of self-hug where we place one hand, left hand on the right shoulder, right hand over the left, under the left arm. And then actually in this way adapted from Tibetan Buddhism, making this vu sound. There's a low vibration sound deep in the gut, like vu. And what that does physiologically is it increases the amount of energy and information coming from the limbic system back up to the brain. So where, before, the brain was sending the signals to the body, which were sending it into a freeze response or kind of fear loop. What this does is it breaks the loop because now there's something else going on. And so that helps people cut through all kinds of anxiety. Pretty effective.
They don't necessarily, like, as you're speaking, I recall what Daniel Siegel said so early, is that just think about like preverbal memories as you had the experience, so you have to have some memory of it. You just didn't have the verbal language to make sense of that memory. So where did it go? It had to go somewhere. It's not gone, right? It's stored in your brain or your body or whatnot. But do you need to have the experience in your body of remembering that memory, or no? You can just know that you have an experience in your body, or that's where you hold disease and heal it that way.
Right, but people are having an emotional experience. This emotional imprint has come up. They might not know where that's from. And the great thing is that using these somatic practices, we don't need to know where it's from. If we know, that's great. If we don't, that's fine. Because it's just tapping directly body to body. So it's the right medicine for that situation.
So you talk in the book about the integration of all the various entities. What does that integration look like? Like, what would that look like to be whole or fully integrated?
Well, I think that's a journey. It's like the horizon. There's always farther to go. It's like looking at the leaves right now here in San Francisco. The spring has come and the leaves are these different shades of green. But they're always changing the shade of green. They're always in a state of becoming. And so in that same way, I think wholeness or integration is really a continual state of becoming, a horizon. And I can say some of the processes really that point to that state and help to achieve it are, being in a place of flow in our lives. Being in a place of connection with our own emotional experience. Being able to breathe through our body, feel at home in our body. And out of that, being able to achieve a real intimacy with the people that we care about. And carry, that sense of kindness or connection to the people whom we're just meeting. Because one of the implications of this is that the mind is not just up here in the head. The mind is an embodied and emergent relational process. That as we see each other, we're coming into being. And so another person's well-being and our well-being are mutually supportive. It's, that we can't get happiness just from this isolated cranial brain self.
Well, and then when you think of consciousness in the way of we are all universally connected and one, it makes perfect sense.
Well, it's Earth Day, right? So that's the natural place to go.
It is Earth Day.
Yeah, that we're all one body. All of those beings in us are one body, and our well-being depends on them. And theirs on us. So then out of that, empathy arises, and that empathy is the place of not only our own wellness, but also the ground for an ethics of wellness. Because we're all wired the same way. We all depend upon that kindness and empathy from the very beginning of our life. Even if we have no religious background whatsoever, we've already experienced the spirituality of people caring for us when we were too young to care for ourselves. And then that understanding of mutuality through our healthy connection provides the basis for our ongoing connection to our body and our connection to each other.
So what do you think we lose when we Westernize these experiences?
Well, I would say that our Western way of knowing is very often reductionistic. And so we're hoping, right, to isolate out these little bits like mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
What happens when you isolate mindfulness out of, the other nourishing bits is sometimes you end up with a place where people are practicing meditation, but they don't have a sense of the ethics involved.
Meaning what?
Well, for instance, that great multinational company Monsanto, they went through sort of like mindfulness classes, but there might have been something missing because Monsanto's products have not, brought about wellness and wholeness for everybody. That's one example. Or what can happen is that we have, a good mental understanding, or we begin to tap into this wholeness of the body. But we're, as human beings, really hungry for ritual. Ritual is the embodied narrative. It's our way of making meaning, and it's not just cognitive, but it's really comes through the senses. That's the way that we're wired, that the parts of the brain that are connected to the senses are also connected to those, deep core memories and, the sense of self. So that if we're able to convey this sense of wholeness and wellness through embodied connection, through a visualization, through music, what that is doing is it's tapping into the brain's capacity for vertical integration. According to Dan Siegel and other people who are doing the relational neurology part, music, dance, rhythm, poetry, these are some of the strongest pathways to making connection between the body and the mind. And all of these are at play in good ritual.
Interpersonal neurobiology. That is what is called. I was like, what is it called that he does? And then this just triggered it for me. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So can you talk about rituals? Can you walk us through them? Because I think each one was so important. And you started with setting intention.
Yes. So of course, the intention needs to be clear. That we can't, as healers, the first thing is, how is the self as instrument doing? If we're going to be conscious and intentional, it starts from the moment before we open the door. It starts perhaps the moment that we wake up in the morning. The healers that I interviewed, they would start the day with this intention. To be a vehicle for healing, using a traditional Tibetan Buddhist medicine Buddha visualization practice. Then, as we sort of go into the world, and that quality of mindfulness is going to help the healing work to happen. First and foremost, as what Dr. Wangmo said, the doctor has to be mindful. If you're checking someone's pulse, or if you are, kind of observing their relational life, mindfulness. So then out of that mindfulness, we create space within so that what we hear, we truly hear as a clinician or as a therapist. And then through that creating space inside, it's possible to create that really healthy relational space. And actually, Dan Siegel also writes about this, the different stages where we begin with another person by matching, sort of like mind to mind. And then maybe it kind of drops in that we're connecting emotionally. And then we're connecting somatically. We can feel within our body the state of another person because our own neural wiring is in a good place. And then out of that, really, the connection is what he calls interoception. And so that's that felt sense. Mm-hmm. And as we do that, that's creating sacred space where the person knows they're being seen in a true way, in an authentic way. Mm-hmm. That's what brings about the healing, that quality of connection. And why? I mean, we can look at this even physiologically and say if people feel disconnected, if they feel unseen, unwitnessed, then they're more likely to experience a kind of loneliness and depression while they're doing their physical healing, for instance, in a hospital. I see that. And if people are depressed, then their immune system is not going to be functioning as well. The healing process is just not going to be as vigorous. It only makes sense to use all the tools at our disposal.
Well, and for anybody listening who thinks, therapy is just talking, you just described all the things. And as you were going through it, I'm thinking in my head, okay, yes. Yeah. I mean, you put words to it in a way that I had never really thought about it before, but that's exactly what happens. And I think, people have often said to me, have you been in therapy or were you in therapy? And I was. I've talked about this before. I was in therapy for 17 years. I still work with a healer because I feel like if I am not clear, if I am not attuned, if I am not aware of what is stirring for me, then I cannot hold space for somebody else to uncover and reveal what is difficult for them.
Yes, that's it. And so by creating the sacred space within them, we're able to create space together with the other person for attunement. And then out of that, there are ways in which we can kind of evoke the sacred and the numinous, and depending on the patient's own map of that, we can help them to make meaning of things. And then what's going on within the vessel of that therapeutic relationship is then they're being reconnected to their community. Every one of their relationships becomes a healing relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've had that experience too, where people have said to me, you helped me, but in helping me, you also helped this person and that person and that person and that person and that person. And then the trickle effect. And I don't normally think of that, but it's so incredibly powerful. Yeah. Because it is that notion of like, to heal one person, you heal the world.
That's it. That's true. There's always that interconnection between the individual and the collective healing. And also what inevitably happens, I would say personally, is that as we work on the healing of another, we're also working on ourselves. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is beautiful. And within this, there's a change of consciousness that the healer's consciousness is being serving, as a vehicle for the healing, but also ultimately the client's consciousness also shifts. Mm-hmm. You don't solve the problem at the level that it was created.
Right. And so I have two thoughts on that. One, when people ask like, who's the best therapist? The answer is it's the best person for you. Because the relationship is really, and there's been research on this, the relationship is where the healing happens.
Definitely.
And what was my other thought that you just said? It will come back to me. I'll have to. This is why I need to write things down. I'm getting old and I need to write things down. One other question before we wrap up. Can you talk about the 5 elements in healing?
Yeah, the 5 elements. So, our body is made out of the 5 elements. It's, our body is nature. And these elements can be understood to represent different parts of our human experience. For instance, water is usually associated with the emotions. But water in the Tibetan 5-element theory is also associated with confidence. If you have healthy water, then the confidence is in place. Or fire, fire is connected with our ability to take action, to assert ourselves, to move. Earth, earth is, our own groundedness and centeredness, and the air or space is a quality of mind. Keeping a mind that is clear like space.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens within this work, the traditional work, is that as part of the assessment, the teacher or the healer can see where an element is missing and bring it back. And that's important, that whether it's within like a Tibetan system where people can use like certain sounds from the Salon practices, or within Buddhist Qigong. Also, there are correspondences between the elements as they're identified in Chinese medicine and the movements and sounds that we can make to restore balance.
So the notion is that if any of these are not there or they're missing, then you're not fully in alignment.
Yes, it's a really good map for seeing where things will optimally be, and then what might need help. And so these practices can be a way of strengthening and helping us to reconnect.
And
one of the really simple ones that I do with people sometimes, if I notice, for instance, that they have a lot of air but not enough earth, that as a therapist, sometimes people are ungrounded. And so then I'll emphasize, the Qigong movements that throw that root, a taproot deep into the ground, and just feeling that connection we have to our families and our communities and everything that heals us at our root. Whereas for someone else, if they're like depressed or a kind of don't have, agency or activity, what I might do is emphasize the big movements that connect with a sense of liberation, or a sense of fire, or a sense of this big space, like the big blue sky that holds it.
So if someone is feeling like their self-esteem is they're feeling like they don't have a lot of self-worth, or their self-esteem is low, do you then, like, would a prescription to that be to go be near natural water and spend time listening to it and being in that?
Yeah, if the emotions are, basically needing a kind of cleansing and healing, then I find giving people something to do around water, very intentionally connecting with the element of water and letting their own water flow is a really good prescription. It's never like one size fits all, but there are a lot of kind of tried and true things that we can fall back on.
If there is an element that you feel like most sort of attracted to, does that say something about you, or is there any?
I think it often does, and it often shows up in people's relationships, right? Because we see the complementary balance. If one person is very grounded, but they feel like their life gets boring, they might invite in this real adventurous spirit, who has like a lot of fire, or is out like surprising them, and maybe has a lot of movement and air. But on the other hand, if someone else might have a lot of fire, but they might really look for earth, because of that experience they have. Well, I'm with this person. That's really stabilizing for me. I need someone to toast the bread in the morning. I'm not the cook. I'm not the toaster. And so, within our own lives, we can look and see at this time what's the element that's going to be the most complementary. And of course, sometimes it happens we might be in such a pattern that we don't see that we need fire or we need earth. But sometimes we do.
Wow. Well, this is fascinating. I feel like I could talk to you for like another hour. But thank you so much, Hyang. If people want to find you or the book, where can they do that?
The website is mountainpath.org. So mountain, like the big mountains, and then path.org.
Great. And all of that will be in my show notes as well. Thank you so much for your time today.
The pleasure is absolutely mine.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.